welcome to another Mad Men podcast, a series of podcasts where we hope to uncover some great stories, some great yarns, and a little bit of humour with a dash of hope in these interesting times. My name is Jonathan Fogarty. It's a privilege to be with you again for the Mad Men podcast series. And joining me, as always, is the indescribable Mr. Simon Reeves. Simon, how are you, sir?
We've gone from incomparable to indescribable. That's much more appropriate. Thank you, John. Great to see you. Look, 4 of these people on this screen are very fit and one of them isn't. And it's our viewers' role to find out which one isn't by the end of this.
Well, we're about to find out. We've got some really interesting people from the world of athletics joining us, which is a sport that's been so important to Australia for many, many years. We've got Commonwealth Games, we've got World Championships, we've got Olympic representation, 3 really interesting people. It's a great pleasure to welcome, in no particular order, Lee Naylor, Mark Ladbrook, and the young and fit and aspiring upcoming Mr. Alex Beck. Welcome, one and all.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
I'd like to start with Lee, if I may. Lee, sprinting, running, athletics is such an important part of the story of the 3 of you. Tell us a little bit about where sprinting and athletics went from just being a pastime to actually consuming your life and becoming so important.
And it did consume my life and become so important. Well, I must admit, full disclosure, I'm old now. So I retired 20 years ago. So the Sydney Olympics were 20 years ago, and it does feel like yesterday. So I was in the Australian team from 1989 to 2000, which just went so fast, as Alex would know, your athletics career, and Mark knows it just goes so fast. So my I guess commencement into the Australian team was probably a lot more different in terms of pathway to most people. I was a country girl, a dairy farmer's daughter in central Victoria, and I didn't even do little athletics, and I did some school sports, but typically in the country you play netball in the winter, and then you go across the road and watch the footy, and then in the summer you play tennis. So I did school sports in between that. So I was a skinny, fit kid. I came to Melbourne as a just turned 18-year-old and joined Melbourne Hiatus Club because it was right there. And I was one of those, wow, where did she come from? Because I came from nowhere. And, within that year, I was 3rd ranked junior in the world. I'd broken the Australian record for under 20s that I think Debbie Flintoff-King had prior to that. And it wasn't broken until a couple of years later when Kath Freeman broke it. So, yeah, I started late and fast, and then, had a great 12 years after that. So typically people go through pathways, as in most sports have pathways, but I just kind of went boof.
Mark, you're not entirely dissimilar to Lee in that country Victoria was where you grew up and spent a lot of your youth. What was your path like towards ultimately the 400 metres?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities and also a little bit of difference too. I actually grew up in the suburbs, the Bayside suburbs of Melbourne until I was 11 years of age. And I lived literally 400 metres from the little Sandringham athletics track. So since the age of 4, I was competing flat out in little athletics around the corner because my big brother did it. And my father was the president of the Little Aths Club. And that was just our family thing. We'd walk around every Saturday morning. I would just play with my mates and do tons of events. And then all of a sudden, we just got ripped out of our little Bayside suburb there and moved out to Gippsland in Victoria. And then the reality of athletics for me was the only access I guess I had was school competitions, which I did a little bit at school. And I still did some club stuff in my teenage years. And I tried to continue through, which I managed to do through those summer years, but it was a lot of travel involved and, training. There was no tracks or anything out where I was. It was just running on the farm or on the dirt roads. I did a lot of training, chasing the cows around. And I guess I just was so passionate about the sport and I loved it so much. And I'm sure, I certainly saw a lot of other kids my age who just dropped off through the years as they got older and things became more difficult. I also played, so like Lee, my sport in winter, we played AFL, so it was called VFL back then. So football and then when I could, athletics. And then as I got to finishing school age, then it was the decision, AFL or at track and field. For me, it was a no-brainer. I watched my older brother. He was a very talented AFL player who just, he kind of chose just to play local footy with his mates, and I wanted to travel and see the world. So that was my motivation to relocate back to Melbourne, find myself a coach, and then step things up to a higher level. So, yeah, pretty protected, I guess, out in the country with the reality of the international sport, though, a bit naive.
Mm-hmm. Alex, for you, a young kid growing up here on the Gold Coast where we're based, how did you find your way to athletics? And probably of more interest to me anyway, how did you find the 400? Because it's not maybe a natural foray for an athlete. You either run fast or you run long. 400 is an interesting event, isn't it? So to tell us a little
absolutely.
bit how you got there and how you found the 400.
A bit of like guess and check, really. When I was young, I sort of started off as a very average 200 runner and probably even more average 800 runner, and always found myself somewhere sort of in the middle was going to be for me. I actually got my start at school. I didn't do little athletics, and was really lucky that I was approached by a really knowledgeable teacher at school after an athletics carnival and said, "Mate, I think you're okay. Can I give you some training?" And I said, "Absolutely. Let's do it." So for the next 6 weeks, we did some school time, lunchtime sessions, and got me to a state titles before he said, "Hey, you need to go on and find a proper sort of full-time coach." Lucky enough to find Glennis Nunn as a coach available to me here on the Gold Coast. And I think almost inevitably I was a 400 runner given the depth of 400 talent that she had in the squad at the time. Michael Rehart is still the current Queensland record holder. Dylan Grant, the third fastest Queenslander all time, all part of that group. So just training with those guys, I think the style of training really led to 400. And I think I almost just fell into it with that almost good 200 speed and not bad 800 endurance. But the 400 just suited me really well.
Al, you've unfortunately got a pretty average coach right now, right?
I wouldn't say that, Simon. It's actually really interesting hearing about him back in the day chasing cows. That's quite interesting. No, I recently changed coach. Well, it's been about 2 years now, Mark. So it's been a little while.
I know.
Working with Mark. And yeah, it's been awesome. I've really enjoyed the new challenge and new training environment, and the work we've been doing has been fantastic. Running a PB earlier this year was massive weight for me and really big improvement. And looking towards Tokyo, I'm really confident that we can get there together.
So Lee, would like to talk about, and since Alex has mentioned Tokyo, we all now know what's happened at that event and how it's been pushed. And the Japanese, I'm sure, are doing it very tough. An Olympic Games in any country, as an athlete, that's such an incredible carrot. Tell us a little bit about the lure. You're an Australian champion and all those things are marvellous and incredible. But the lure of the Olympics, is it still the pinnacle event for athletes? And certainly tell us about your relationship and the romance of an Olympic Games for you.
Well, and it is a romance. I think everyone that goes to the Olympics just is in love with the Olympics, and it's this feeling that I always say that money can't buy. It gives you a little heart flicker, and my love of the Olympics probably really was solidified in 1988. So I was studying for my year 12 exams on the farm, on the couch with I can picture my skinny legs crossed and my books in my lap. I mean, I was studying, but I still had my books in my lap, and I was watching the Seoul Olympics, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I can literally remember every step that Debbie Flintoff-King took in that 400-meter hurdles final. And Debbie, she lunged at the line and won by 1/100th of a second. I thought, my gosh, this is it's brutal, but the ecstasy of winning by that, I mean, it's it almost gives me goosebumps thinking of it. It's like, wow. And almost then it was sort of born that I can do that. I've probably got no idea how to do that, but why would I not aim to do that? And then, within a matter of time, you are, chasing your dream and at the Olympics and loving life. I mean, my first Olympics was Atlanta, which was very different to Sydney. very different in terms of resources. And as much as we like to talk about, oh, you know, how did you go and what did you win, or, you know, what medals do you have in your career, I really enjoy reflecting back on just the feelings and the stories, because you grow up in your 20s, don't you? I mean, that's where you shape who you are. And so, you know, the stories, you know, frame you and shape you. And, you know, and one of the funniest stories, even from Atlanta, and it's got nothing to do with running, but it's got everything to do with the warm-up track. And Mark, you might remember this, but the 400-metre heats, they will run at 9 o'clock in the morning. So Kath Freeman knocked on my door at 5 o'clock to have breakfast downstairs at McDonald's. I mean, this is the irony, it's killing me here. So we had breakfast downstairs at McDonald's, but they did have cereal. Alex, you'll be happy to know.
Yeah.
So we had our breakfast, and that was all well and good. Literally, you know, got dressed. I think the bus from the village to the stadium, we left at about 6 a.m. Now, interestingly, we'd been to that warm-up track probably every day for the past week, because we'd been in the village for a week or so. And Freeman said, Lethal, do you think the bus driver's going the wrong way? So he actually, there's this big freeway sort of loops. He couldn't get off the loop. And so I sort of totted up and said, I think you've got to turn left. Now, that didn't seem like such a big story until we learnt later on that at the Paralympics, an Australian athlete actually circled those highways and never got off and missed his race. So, wow. So I recall that. And then we warmed up, you know, we started warming up, and our race was at 8 o'clock, which meant we had to be in the call room at, race was at 9 o'clock, had to be in the call room at 8 a.m. and warming up at 7 a.m. And they had porta-loos at the Atlanta Olympics, because they obviously had many years to prepare but didn't put in proper facilities. And those porta-loos hadn't been cleaned from the day before. So Kat and I, so there's literally a row, I would say, look, I'm just guessing 50 porta-loos. And, you know, when it's early morning and you've had a coffee and you're a little bit nervous, you need to go. So Kath and I at the same time went, okay, we'll go. And she opened up one door and was like, I can't do it. So I opened up the second door. Oh, gosh, you're right. I can't do it either. So we literally went to about 7 or 8 toilets until we saw Carl Lewis come out of one. He came out of like the 9th. And I said to Freeman, okay, this is going to be hard, but if Carl Lewis can come out of a porta-loo before the Olympics,
so can we.
So can we. So I mean, those stories are silly, but they really pop you in the moment. And, you know, there's really not all that much fuss and, you know, frills with the Olympics. It is what it is. And they're the memories, and that's 24 years ago, and I can just, you know, remember the giggles.
That is hilarious. I love that story. Mike, you were there as well. That, you know, Muhammad Ali likes to flame, and as Lee's sort of taken us behind the scenes, as it were, in many ways with her fantastic story. What were the feelings like for you of wearing the green and gold and representing your country for that little kid who'd run around in Sandringham?
Oh, I mean, it is such a roller coaster of an experience. It is just, you're just oversensitized with everything happening all the time. You never know what's about to pop up around the corner or who you run into, or you're talking about, I mean, at least talking about those early starts, and it was just dreadful. We were dragged down there on the bus to get there for these warm-ups. And for me, it's funny you're talking about Carl Lewis. I was literally warming up for one of my races, same thing. And there's Carl Lewis stretching on the steeplechase. And he was like my boyhood idol when I was a kid. Same thing from Seoul Olympics, Lee. I sat there with the remote control on the VHS and recorded every single athletics event mixed in with all of the other sports. I had it triggered up with mirrors from my bed to the lounge room so I could get the infrared to do the recording while I was still in bed. And I've still got those tapes. They're somewhere in a box here. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly I'm standing there and there's Carl Lewis stretching on the steeplechase. And I was like, I've got to go talk to the king. So that was part of my warm-up, and a little 2 minutes, and he was really nice and had a good chat, and just one opportunity after opportunity of that to literally live in reality those experiences to suddenly pop up and go, well, when I was a little kid, And here I am. I'm living in that moment and actually doing it. So that's, yeah. And I mean, there's countless, opportunities or times where those things happen. So yeah, it's certainly something, as you get older, you're definitely very happy and satisfied that you got to achieve that. Yeah.
Alex, I kind of feel this is a bit of an unfair conversation in some ways. You came so close to qualifying for an Olympics in the past. You're a guy, I think I might be wrong, you've been on the podium 8 years in a row for the Australian champs in the 400 metres. You're really close, but you're not there yet for Tokyo. I mean, tell me a little bit about this delay. Is it helping you? Is it hindering you? How do you keep the mind and the body sharp? And tell us a little bit about what you've got to do to make your Olympic dream come true.
I mean, in all honesty, hearing stories like that for me is just, it reinforces the hard times and, all the hard sessions. You go, you know what, I want to be there. I want those experiences. Like, those stories are amazing. I had the privilege of seeing Bolt in the flesh a couple of times, and high-fived with him once. That was awesome. And that, being able to do that at an Olympic Games, it's the pinnacle of your sporting career. It seems like the whole world revolves around that for 2 weeks. It's pretty surreal. For me, being so close so many times, it's just really reinsured that the fire is there, and I want to be there. Being delayed is obviously not ideal. I think there's been a lot of exposure about the delays and the issues that I think the world is facing, not only just trying to get this particular sporting competition going, but there's health crises going on that far exceed what's required to run an Olympics. So there's obviously priorities going on at the moment, but for me it's about just doing a job, and we show up to training every day with that one job in mind, and that's to qualify. I've been very close, and I think achieving that automatic standard has been a real goal, because leaving it in the hands of discretion unfortunately hasn't worked out for me in the past. So I'd love to be able to just essentially pick yourself by running fast enough to satisfy that criteria. So it's a big ask, but that's my motivation, is to run that automatic standard, so it ticks the box, and I can't be left in Australia watching another games on the TV. I want to be over there, and I want to be representing Australia.
Al, you didn't high-five Usain when he was coming out of a porta-loo, did you, I hope?
No. Thankfully, the comps I've been to have had some adequate bathroom facilities.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Things have changed.
The world's evolved.
Lee and Mark, you both talked about watching Seoul from Australia. And, of course, we know what happened in Seoul, and that was Ben Johnson was nailed in the 100 metres in probably the most infamous doping story of all time. So you both ran against athletes who had clouds over them, who in many cases were wiped out at some point in their careers as well, or banned. Take us to the inside of that, Lee, and what was that experience like, knowing that you were running against other people who were chemically enhanced, as it were?
Yeah. Really good question, Simon, because it certainly has, it really rattles people's brains. And I know some Australian athletes get really frustrated by that and competing against people who take drugs. And I've certainly competed against lots of girls who have subsequently been banned, which is great. So the system works. And, I've run against girls, which is, it's so unusual to put your blocks down at an international competition, and the girl next to you has a 5 o'clock shadow, or literally, well, a 3-day growth, not even a 5 o'clock shadow. It's like, my gosh, I don't even think she's trying to hide this. And she's literally got an Adam's apple to match. And so at that stage, you just really have to remind yourself as to why you're running. And, when I think about why do I run and what do I love about running, I reflect back to my country high school when they would cut the grass in October, and that smell of cut grass. I mean, sorry, Alex, I'm so old. Don't want to get the old. I was running at the Olympics and literally feeling like that. So, I've always said control the controllables. I've always said, yes, I compete for Australia, but I compete for myself, and I will run in my lane, and I can only run as fast as I can run. What the other girls do, I have no control over. And so I really, reconcile with that rather early, because every year there are people getting just busted with drugs, which I do think is great, because it shows that it's working, but it also shows that people are still cheating. And it's just it's one of those things that, yes, everyone will try and get that sort of edge, and it's also frustrating for me to think, why does the outcome always have to be someone has to win? And I know that's what competition is, but when you've got 60 people at the Olympics and they've all qualified and they're the fastest in the world, well, only one person is going to win. So I wonder if you're trying to take drugs to win, then the rest of us supposed to be unhappy? Because I don't want to feel like I'm unhappy with my performance. I'm going to be really, really happy with my performance. I'm just going to run my race, and I assume I'm going to try and win, and if I don't, I don't. But my end point isn't going to be disappointment. When I don't stand on a podium, or disappointment if I don't win, or disappointment if I'm on the back of a Kellogg's pack. I think sometimes we get so fixated with that winning, and do everything, that winning at all costs, that we lose the journey, which I never wanted to lose the journey. As a skinny little country girl, I never wanted to lose the journey. And so, Lee Naylor ran as fast as Lee Naylor could. Sometimes it was okay. Sometimes it was pretty disappointing for me and everyone else. I live with that.
Just a quick one for Lee. I think I said to Lee, in hindsight, do you think you feel more with that feeling about why we did it back then versus just winning and being driven to compete to win? Because I know certainly you talk to a lot of athletes post-Olympics after such a massive event and so many years of getting to that point, and there's just the fallout's just always terrible for so many athletes. They're so, there's depression and they're down and out and they just are lost people. And I've seen so many people, teammates and friends, who have been on that kind of roller coaster ride. I mean, I know even for myself, I certainly felt that way for a few years afterwards. And I think the irony is that coaching and getting back into the sport from that angle has been the thing that's given me the better perspective on exactly what Lee had said before. Why we do it is we just want to see how good we can be individually and get our best performance. And that's exactly what I sell to all of the kids that I coach. Anyone coming through, you've got to forget about everybody else and do it for the love of it. And if we achieve that, then we're all winning. So, yeah. Lee, is that?
No. That's a long question, but well said. No, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in balance, and I know that lots of NSOs, national sporting organisations, and sports always say it's all about work-life balance and and having other interests, but it's absolutely essential, because you retire from the Olympics at the tender age of 30 or 32, and most people haven't thought of life after that. Which really is such an indictment on coaches and on the system, that they didn't prepare people. And I don't know why I prepared myself, but I just stayed at uni. So I stayed and did a PhD, and all of a sudden here I am with a PhD in neurochemistry, which people used to think I made up, but I just because it was so unusual. But I did that knowing that I probably wanted more out of myself. So I'm, with my children, I've got 3 teenage children, and, they need to be, the best versions of themselves, but they need to be, quite diverse in having lots of different skills, because life throws at you lots of different challenges. So yeah, you and I have got the same, group of friends that have struggled post Olympics, and I'd be interested to hear if Alex thinks there's support out there to at least broaden your mind to thinking, yes, put everything that you can into your Olympic dream, but parallel that dream into knowing that your life, extends for a long time, and academically and career-wise, use those skills to do something great afterwards as well.
Al, you want to join in there?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good conversation. I think the 2 points are actually almost linked in a way, because we sort of feel like in order to compete against these athletes that are, we'll call them chemically enhanced, and we'll keep going with that, we have to train harder, and we have to put all of our eggs into into that one basket. So it has to be our entire lives. You know, these guys that were the best in the world don't have part-time jobs, or they're not working full-time. They're full-time athletes. And for a lot of us in Australia, that's a really unrealistic expectation. You know, we're not highly paid. We're not able to, you know, live off the wage that athletics provides. So a lot of us have to make a living by, you know, working full or part-time. But, you know, if athletics is, you know, your entire life, and you try so hard and you invest all of this money and sacrifice, and you know, you get to that Olympics and then suddenly it's all over, it's then difficult to sort of turn that gear and switch to, okay, well, now my life actually begins, when, you know, you've got friends that have saved up for a house, or are married with children. I know personally, being now one of the older athletes on the circuit, as scary as that is, being only 28, you know, I've got friends that are now starting to have babies and have houses, and, you know, when things aren't going well on the track, you sort of sit there sometimes and go, well, I actually am pretty far behind in terms of, you know, life. You know, I don't have enough money to buy a house. I don't have a wife. I don't have, you know, some of those doubts can creep in. And then I think a lot of people, when, you know, athletics does finish for them, they almost fast forward and go, oh man, I've got to catch up on what everyone else is doing. And I think that can really be sort of a dark hole, because as Leah and Mark have both said, that, you know, you have all of this ambition, all of this drive, and all of this purpose, and then suddenly that's not there, and you still have to get up in the morning, and you don't have, you know, that same background or that same job to go to, or uni or direction. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said with not necessarily athletics. I think there's a lot of sports that suffer the same with athletes that sort of go from that, you know, really looked after sporting environment to, all right, guys, you're on your own in the big wide world. And you see a lot of guys fall off the wagon because there isn't that support. So I think that's really a conversation that needs to be had, not only in athletics, but across a number of sporting fields, to really help the athletes through, you know, not only their athletic development, but then moving and transitioning into the rest of their life.
Let's maybe turn our attention to chemistry of a different kind, and that's the chemistry perhaps between athlete and coach. To Mark and then to Alex, you know, what are the hallmarks of a good coach-athlete relationship? Alex, what do you get out of the time you spend with Mark, and why is it different? I'd be really interested to hear about, you know, the partnership that you two have got, and why it works or why it doesn't, and what are the hallmarks of a good one?
I think probably the first one is trust. You've got to believe in sort of what the coach is giving you, and the direction that you're both having. And that's not built overnight. That's definitely taken a lot of time, and through that trust, there has to be conversation. Like I know if there's an exercise or a set or something that pops up with Mark, it's like, Mark, what are we doing this for? What's the point of that? And we have a conversation about it. I'd like to hope that I'm now at the stage that, you know, I know a little bit about what I think I should be doing and getting out of it. So I sort of come to Mark as well sometimes and go, Mark, I'm doing this, or I've got this idea, or I want to add this into the program. What do you think? And it's a lot of give and take, and I think it has to be that way. If it's completely driven by the athlete, you know, the coach can almost feel like they don't really have much of a say. And then if it's completely driven by the coach, sometimes the athlete can just, you know, wander aimlessly through sessions and seasons and not really know what the direction is. So I think it's a partnership. You know, we're both sort of in it together, and, you know, I'm investing my, you know, life into it. So I expect the same thing, and I know Mark gives it, you know, as much as he can, and he puts all his effort into, you know, prescribing the right thing and making sure that it is, you know, spot on. Because if it's not, you know, we can get athletes risk injury, and those sort of things can derail, you know, the one chance at an Olympics, for example. I think Mark can go into some detail about, you know, injuries, as we all probably can, injuries at the wrong time that have caused massive, you know, delays and, you know, I don't want to use the word failures, but unable to achieve the goals of that particular season. Sometimes that can be simple training errors, and having that relationship with your coach to go, Coach, actually, I'm really stuffed from what we did yesterday. Can we drop a rep off, or can we modify today's session? And having the sort of trust and confidence to be able to have those conversations with your coach is really important to me.
And I think, I've been very lucky with Alex because he is more mature as an athlete. So he has a lot of experience himself. And Alex is one of those good athletes who, he's a qualified physiotherapist. He's got a lot of experience in the work place as well. So I'm dealing with someone who understands things at a really high level. So, for example, even like a week ago, he went and did some photo promotion kind of thing for a friend, and they had to do some excessive exercises prior to one of our key track sessions. He was just doing a couple of run-throughs in the warm-up, and I spot it straight away, and I go, mate, you're flat, what's happened? And he's told me, yep, okay. And we just modify training. As we go through it, we just change and adapt. But it's become really easy for us to do that. Whereas certainly I know in the first 12 months, we're kind of sussing each other out on how, what is he doing? Is that really sore? Is that really painful? It happens very quickly now. And I think every year we're getting better and better and more refined at everything. And the irony with this whole Corona situation is we're probably going even better than ever compared to the lead into the Tokyo trials back in March, where we were going really well. He'd run lifetime PBs. But I think now we're going even better again. And then I know, there's certainly that the summer season comes, fingers crossed we get the competitions we need, and hopefully some normality comes back. But, I know if we keep doubling our efforts and staying focused on our task, I'm expecting him to run, easily the best he's ever run in his life. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's, in a nutshell, it's pretty simple. Run one lap as fast as you possibly can, and let's see what it is. So he's one of the easy ones. When you have the younger athletes, that's a whole new kettle of fish. And that's, I'm lucky now. It's, you kind of look back and realise, gee, I've been coaching for over 20 years now, and you actually rack up a fair bit of experience. So you do make a lot of better decisions, and you see a lot of things a lot faster, and you just don't make the same mistakes. Some of those young kids go, why do I have to do this? And you literally almost have to say to them, just do it. But, most of the kids are pretty smart, and they figure things out, and they see also, I'm lucky because I have an Alex there, and they see the pathway he's on and how he's very rarely injured. He's always professional with everything he's doing, and he sets the standard. So, other than being, fashionably late occasionally, he's spot on. So, and that certainly sets a really good role model for those up and comers. And I've only been back in the Gold Coast for the last couple of years, and we've built up a nice little squad. And in another year or two, hopefully after Alex goes to the Olympics, I'm expecting we'll be even stronger again. So I plan on sticking around and basing everything out of Somerset College, where I'm the head coach of athletics there, and they've been really supportive with Alex. He's an ex-student, so it ties in nicely. The headmaster's fantastic with all of that, and Sam, your own son Simon, he's a product of the school as well, and he's a pretty talented athlete. So we're building some pretty good things for the future there.
Yeah, look, I've been lucky to watch firsthand the great relationship between you and Alex, Mark, and you do take your hat off to the dedication. We've touched on it with Alex and talking about there's not exactly great rewards here, and in the middle of winter, in the middle of a stinking hot summer's day, there he is doing 400 after 400, and I scratch my head and think I would have given up a long time ago.
It is addictive. It's very addictive,
yeah,
Simon. I still get myself out on my little curve runner here in the gym, and I just love to get some lactic acid occasionally. So I miss it.
I'll have to believe you on that one, Mark. So, Lee, just quickly, we do believe you 100% that you have a neurochemistry degree, all right? We know that. Which segues into a bit of mental health here as well. And so we've come a long way since you and Mark were running it at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. I believe so. What do you say, Lee, to young athletes these days? And how do you prepare them for disappointment? How do you build resilience? How do you encourage them to sort of stay the course in their careers in terms of mental health?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's quite close to home because I mean, I do have a son that Mark has sort of helped guide a little bit as well when we've been in the Gold Coast, and he's a current national champion in 400 hurdles under 18 and was in the Oceania team last year. Although he's sort of transitioned, he's also a footballer, so he's sort of looking to be in the draft this year. So I've got you know, a high achieving athlete. And, you know, lots of other, you know, I coach at schools and I just love athletics. So you're right. When I coach and when I, you know, guide my own children, I'm really, really mindful of that mental health aspect. And when we look at mental health, and I deliver mostly, you know, training with organisations, government and non-government, and trying to make them understand the disabling effect of poor mental health. And if we understand that it's so disabling, you know, you constantly have anxiety with athletics, although sometimes that's exhilarating, but it is constant. But at the same time, you want it, but you don't want too much of it. You know, you have a bad run, you're a little bit, you know, cranky and depressed. So you've got all of these feelings in sport that really are a really acute symptomology of, you know, mental health. And it's so important to make sure, it goes back to that balance, it's so important to make sure that physiologically kids are healthy. From a nutritional perspective, they're healthy. They're in a healthy environment with great leaders such as Mark, who understand and who are role models and have been there before. Because if you have this cortisol and adrenaline, which keeps you going, and you never switch off, and you don't tap into, this is probably a little bit too much, and you don't tap into, wow, I'm always feeling like this, then it does lend itself to really poor you know, mental health in populations. And I do feel as though, you know, people in track and field and people that we went to the Olympics with, I mean, they have taken their lives. People in Australia, I mean, there are 3,000 people take their lives every year. You know, that's a part of the typical population. So I'm mindful of high achievers needing to balance and needing to be just aware of where their mental health fits in health. And as a country, as a population, we are doing so much better than we used to. When I started my PhD, we literally came off the back of people presenting with psychosis and clinicians saying, come on, get over it. Like, well, okay, I'd love to get over it. Thank you very much for that feedback. I'm thrilled to say we're getting better as a sport and as a country, and I hope that, you know, we'll be all picking daisy chains in years to come, and we'll be wondering why we ever thought mental health was such a discriminatory, stigmatized topic to talk about.
And Mark, you see it, I guess, day to day. You've got athletes of all ages, as you've talked about. You know how important, you talked about Alex being a role model. How important is it to have a squad that's got all those different characteristics and role models for the off-track stuff, for the mental health and the balance? It's as important as what they do on the track, surely.
Yeah, I mean, it's this dynamics of different squads, and I mean, Leo will attest to this. Like when you've been in different groups as an athlete, and then I've coached different squads in Melbourne and Queensland and Melbourne and back in Queensland on multiple occasions, and it's finding those athletes that fit and work well together and complement each other and also support each other. I mean, I have, you know, little kids who come and do some training sessions with some of the older ones, and some of the, you know, middle teenage years, they don't want to work with the little kids, and but they're all learning all the time, and I have to pull them aside every so often and say, no, hang on, it's your responsibility as part of our squad to embrace some of these kids, support them, help them, educate them, like Alex does for you or whoever else does. And we make that as much holistic as we can. And I think, you know, and getting back to that whole, you know, the stresses of the competition and being an elite athlete, or even just being an athlete, like these kids come through these school environments and they're expected, all the expectations of winning and all of these things. I mean, I think I've been successful in a lot of school programs because my coaching ethos is, yeah, all I want you to do, every single one of you, is try your best. And then that's all we say in training and competitions, and They turn up and they try their best. I don't care if they come last or whatever it is. And then everybody's on the same page in the whole team. At a school team, I need kids from year 7 to year 12. It's a big range of ages, and they're all part of the same team. So if they're all trying to just do their own personal best, we always go really well. And they have a great time, and then you just get this great bonding of all the kids, and they all, I mean, I've still got kids from who I've coached 20 plus years ago who talk about, oh, remember back then, we were so great, we did this, and they talk about the experiences. And, you know, and I mean, Lee was with me through a lot of those at Melbourne Grammar School, and it's funny talking to those boys now, and they're all grown-ups and having families, and that's why we do it. It's so great. Yeah.
Like I can say what a fantastic role model Alex has been for my own son, for Sam, Mark. He's absolutely taken him by the hand many times at meets and in training as well, and just been a fabulous fella to have around with all his experience. And it comes back to some extent to that one size definitely doesn't fit all, does it? It's just knowing the personalities of each of your runners as well. Al, okay, as we move forward here, what does the future for athletics in Australia look like, and how can we take it more front and centre, as it were, in the media and just across the board?
Look, it's a good question. It's a hard question. I think we're really lucky at the moment that we have some of the best crop of juniors that we've had in a number of years. I think the men's 100 metres, for example, is it's the blue ribbon event. It's the event that most of the population loves to sit down and watch, not only at the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games or World Championships. Guys like Rowan Browning, Jack Hale are really young guys that are going to be there for a number of years and are running lightning quick times. And unfortunately, I think it's got to be on the back of performance. The way we're going to get people involved and excited about track and field is watching guys like Rowan and Jack line up in the 100 metres at the Olympics and seeing guys and girls lining up and being in those races. Everyone sits and watches the Olympics, and they watch for that green and gold in one of the lanes and go, I want to be like that runner. I want to be like that jumper. And that's how it starts, and that's how we grow the sport. It's so difficult competing against the rugby leagues and AFLs in terms of exposure. I don't think we can compete with them because we're a totally different sport. We're in such a unique position. We need to almost focus on us a little bit more instead of trying to fit the mold of these other sports. I think we need to focus on what makes athletics great. And I think Athletics Australia does a great job in some respects in some of their media exposure, and in a lot of ways they do a pretty ordinary job in a lot of others. So I think it's a really hard one because we had some really good, glory days, if you will, with the Telstra A series and, some of the events that Mark and Lee would have run at, national series, having tens of thousands of spectators. I compete week in, week out. I'll be lucky in front of 500 people. That's including the competitors. So, the parents is definitely correct. I think we've really dropped the ball, and we've really, gone down significantly in terms of exposure. And there's no doubt we're in a bit of a hole, and I think it requires some really strong leadership and some really strong ideas from Athletics Australia to get us out of it. Things like the Nitro almost experiment was awesome. Getting back on primetime television, and the attendance that we had at those three competitions was absolutely surreal. But unfortunately, we didn't really capture that and sort of expand upon it. So something like that, which was, new, unique, exciting, engaging. Those are some of the things that we really need to focus on and think about and try to implement in order to regain the exposure within the public.
Oh, well said, Alex. Well, look, in the time we've got left, we could talk forever. Maybe start with you, Lee. Just give us, in the best way you can think of, the place that athletics holds in your heart, and how did it get in there, and what it's going to mean to you when you're having that cup of tea in your rocking chair when you're 95. Give us a sense of of how that love affair will be undimmed and why it was so important?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a good point. I mean, I think it's the memories. I mean, you know, can I remember what time I ran in Helsinki? Can I remember what time I ran in Atlanta or at a World Champs in Gothenburg? Not really. But can I remember how exciting some races were and some villages were and the girls and the guys, but the girls in particular that I hung out with? Yes, I can. And you know, my friendships were formed in the team in my 20s. I mean, Melinda Gainsford Taylor, who I roomed with my entire career. I live in Melbourne, she lives in Sydney, but it probably sounds ludicrous, but we speak to each other, you know, every second day, just for whatever, you know. That's just what we do. I mean, who cares about distance? I mean, we've literally grown up together in our 20s. I mean, and so I'm just so grateful for the sport for that, to have found a best friend and someone who gets me and I get her. So that sort of thing's amazing. And you know, there's a number of athletes like that, whether it's a Lauren Hewitt or a Renee Poetchka, who's, you know, all the way over in Western Australia. They can call at any time. You know, my son stayed with her at national championships at the end of last year. I mean, it's just, you can do that just because you've got this wonderful friendship. So it's those memories and those feelings that I guess I'm grateful for. And then, you know, and globally you meet people and you know, I'm a dairy farmer's daughter. My parents haven't travelled overseas, so for me to have travelled the, you know, most corners of the globe, I am really quite grateful for that, because sport has been the conduit for me to actually, you know, put an overnight bag on a plane and zoom off and see the world. You know, I turn 50 next year, so I imagine, you know, when I turn 60 and 70, you know, will these memories be just as fresh? I imagine they will, because they are so real and so dear. So, you know, I'm grateful for sport and for athletics for that. And I do say, as much as, you know, some sports, you know, make lots of money, and I made 50 cents, let's be honest. It really is, for me, it's just those feelings that money can't buy.
Lee, and they'll also be fresh because you've got a PhD in neuroscience, so your synapses will be perfectly trained and honed like an athlete's, I'm sure.
Well, this is very true if you know anything about the serotonin transporter and the reuptake of serotonin in the hippocampus, which it sounds like you must, Jonathan. Yes.
My amygdala is freaking
I have a book
out
on it right here, okay? I was just reading about it.
That's a whole nother podcast, Lee.
It's untapped, exactly. Fantastic.
Mark Ladbrook, to you, I almost get the sense that you are getting more pride out of your athletic career in the role of coach than the incredible achievements that you had as an athlete. Give us your reflections as you'll get to look back over your athletic career, what it all means to you and why it's been such a central tenet in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a part of my life since I can remember, since I was born. I don't know, I cannot remember a time in my life when I haven't been involved. So, and you're right. For me, I think all of my own individual athletic career was just a build up to becoming a coach. It was, you know, I was kind of the kooky athlete sitting at the warm-up tracks and in the stadium every single day of all of the meets, learning and talking to the athletes and the coaches, and, you know, everyone else is resting or they're off shopping or doing whatever. I just wanted to go to the track and just learn more about the sport. And I was like that as a kid. I'd be catching the train miles away to get a book out of the library about, you know, Sebastian Coe or Steve Ovett or whatever it was. Yeah, I always say to my athletes, you know, you need to become a student of the sport. You need to learn about your events, and you need to figure out, you know, how you can be better and, you know something about the sport. And the number of athletes I've had over the years, and especially you get a new athlete, you start coaching, and they just know nothing about it. And they're really talented. And I just think, oh God, you know, so here I go again. I just try and get them to upskill themselves a little bit. And, you know, it's a little bit more than just athletics. I'm not so, you know, sheltered with that. But I think because the sport of athletics is such a global sport, it has a diverse community, and it brings so many different people together. you can travel anywhere around the world and you can pop into an athletics track or someone who knows about the sport, and you'll instantly have a connection with them. And you can just, even if you don't speak the same language, you can sit there and point some numbers and talk about training sessions or whatever, and you're straight into a really good conversation, and you become friends with people really easily. And you can do it anywhere. So that's, they're the great things about it, I think. Yeah.
Al, you mentioned before the rivalry we have sort of building between guys like Rowan Browning and Jack Hale as well. Somerset College has been lucky in the last few weeks to have Ryan and Genevieve Gregson, world-class athletes in their chosen events. And there is a real electricity around the track when you see those world-class athletes like yourself, but when you see Ryan and Jen run together and kids come down and look at them and go, ask questions. Who's that? What does she do? What does he do? What's his event? That we've got to run with that sort of energy and try and spread this message, haven't we?
Absolutely. And I think it's really exciting. Like the first time they were down at the track, there was only the two of them. And within 2 to 3 weeks, there was a group of about 15 that came down and just heard Ryan Gregson, the Australian 1,500 metre record holder, is here. I want to train with him. I want to do a lap with him. I want to warm up with him. So it's there. People are excited about track and field, and that's why it's almost frustrating to see that we don't get that same exposure, because people are interested, and they're more interested than once every 4 years when the Olympics come around. So it's about finding those people and really giving them that, the athletics that they are looking for. It's such a unique sport because there's events for everybody. Any body shape, size or type, there's an event for you, and it really does cater to everybody. I get really excited when I go to a track and I see Damien Birkenhead, the Australian shot put record holder, Brandon Stark, the high jumper, Australian record holder. All these guys are sort of my age and have been around the traps, and I love being able to go to different tracks and seeing my friends and seeing my sort of fellow athletes succeed in all their events. And it's so good for the sport. We're in such a good position, and it's really important that we're able to capitalize on it, because there is so much, a year before the Olympics, the excitement should really be growing, and people should really be trying to follow some of these athletes and watching their journeys, because there's going to be some really fantastic Olympic highlights, I think, from the Australian track and field team next year. And I just hope that Australia is able to see not only the results, but the hard work that it takes to get there.
Well, we will certainly be following the journey of Alex Beck over the next few months with much interest. Probably all we've got time for, but Simon, just absolutely fascinating, and the passion and the intensity with which these three athletes revere their sport, and the integrity that they've always held it in, is absolutely inspiring.
It really is, Jono, and the intelligence as well. This has just been a really wonderful discussion. I've learned a lot. We're sort of living a bit of this story in our house as well, with a boy who's 18 years old, who's come second at the Australian National Championships under 20 in 2019. And, we're watching him deal with all the things that Lee and Mark and Alex have talked about, all the outside influences, it's life-work balance, study versus track, all of these things. And you feel sometimes at risk of becoming an ugly parent saying, listen, kid, you've got this talent, take it all the way, or do whatever you can with it. Because I have none. I had none in athletics or anywhere much for that matter. So it's really, I've learned a lot here today, John. I've loved it. And it is a wonderful sport that has that fantastic history, these incredible names going back to the Jesse Owens, back into the 1930s. These are legends, so I really hope we can put it back onto, I think, the pedestal that it deserves to be on in Australia.
Well, absolutely. Well, we will wrap it up on that note. It's been an absolute privilege to meet Lee Naylor, Mark Ladbrook, and to Alex Beck on behalf of all of the Mad Athletics fans in Australia. We're all there with you. Good luck towards Tokyo, and it's been an absolute delight to meet you all. Thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we are all up, but on behalf of Simon Reeve and I, Jonathan Fogarty, this has been another Mad Men podcast. It's been a privilege to bring it to you. Thanks, guys, and good luck to all for your futures. Good night.
Thanks
Thanks
all.
very much for having us.
Very much. Thank you.
Good stuff.